What happens when Russia can't defend its skies? Well, 15 explosions ripped through the city in Samara, Russia. Ukrainian drones set Russian oil infrastructure ablaze. Airports in Samara, Penza, and across the country were shut down. Power failed, civilians fled, and officials stayed silent. Though this was not just another drone strike. This is one of Ukraine's most extensive assaults on Russian territory through the course of this war. 112 drones across 6 regions. Refineries in Samara, Ryazan, Feodosia erupted in flames. The skyline was lit up for kilometers. But wait, there is yet more. Strategic electronics hubs in Penza, including the electropower plant, were targeted. This crippled Russia's encrypted military communications. And yet, even more, Feodosia, a drone-enabled logistics base in Crimea, also was hit. But even better, Ukraine destroyed the airfield in Russia from which Russia launches drones to attack Ukraine. We can say very confidently that today was a very bad day for the Putin regime. And thus, it means that today was a great day for humanity. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post here in Kiev, Ukraine. And for over 20 years, I've studied the Putin regime. In fact, it was a subject for my master's and doctoral dissertations. But I didn't spend that time just reading and writing. In fact, I spent that time working against the Putin regime as well. And that's why, for over 15 years, I've been banned for life for entering Russia and even from entering Belarus. But what we see going on right now is that Ukraine isn't just hitting targets, it's hitting the systems. It's hitting Russia's ability to wage war. And with all the current weaknesses of the Putin dictatorship compounding at the same time, the economy that's failing, the oil industry that's losing customers, a U.S. president that's now sending 2 nuclear submarines towards Russia, an air defense system that's not working, things are just not looking very good for the Kremlin. But what's incredible is how little many of these stories, like the explosions today inside of Russia, ever make it into the Western press. But that is why I created this channel, to expose the truth about what's happening inside of Russia, to decode and decipher the truth about the Putin regime, and to also discuss what is really happening here, where I am, in Kiev, Ukraine. So if you'd like to help me with this effort, if you'd like the world to know what is really happening in Russia, to cut past the propaganda and the lies, I ask you just one simple favor that costs you nothing, but helps me immensely. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel. And please consider becoming a channel member today. Thank you. So Ukrainian planners mapped out Penza's military communications grid for months. But then they shut out the lights. Explosions knocked out the power grids and the mobile towers. The only thing that probably spread faster than the flames was the panic. Because guess what? There was a very large panic. The civilians within Samara who were filming these events were shocked. And of course, they started to immediately upload it to Telegram, which is another reason why the Putin regime is now turning off the internet more and more whenever there's strikes. It's not only about preventing Ukrainian drones from reaching their targets. It's also prevent the population from knowing how bad the situation within Russia has become. Ukraine's drone strikes at this point are putting the Putin regime, already weakened, on edge. And drones are changing the war. Speaking of which, we've been fundraising for life-saving drones for the Ukrainian defenders. And since June 2024, the soldiers of the 67th Separate Mechanized Brigade have been holding defensive lines in the Lyman direction, which is in Donetsk. And yesterday I showed you how our drones and our donations have helped the men of the 225th in Sumy, Ukraine. Those are the ones who are preventing the invasion that would come closer to Kiev. Well, just this week, thanks to you, we delivered new drones to the men of the 67th. And that's why the brave men of 67th have this brief message for you from Donetsk, where they're fighting daily and under intense fire. But they wanted to thank you themselves for your support.
Hi friends, we are soldiers of 67th Brigade. Thank you for your drones. They will help to save lives. Thank you, United Unmanned Systems. Thank you, Eric and James J. Smart. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Because of your donations, someone's father, someone's son, someone's husband will return from the war. Thank you. So Ukraine's drones, these attacks are strategic in nature because they're going after Russia's very ability to wage war. And in fact, to give you an idea of how incredibly effective it's been, it came out today that since Ukraine's June 1st attack, Spiderweb, Russia has relocated 15 strategic bombers more than 7,000 kilometers to the remote Ukrainka airbase in Omar. Now, whenever the Russians try to attack, it costs them a lot. In fact, each trip to go launch missiles on Ukraine is 12,400 kilometers. That's 7,700 miles round trip. They need to be refueled 2 or 3 times. That means that they're currently spending 30,000 kilograms, 66,000 pounds of fuel. That means about 12% of a bomber's annual airframe lifespan is being blown through. And Russian pilots themselves call these trips suicide loops. But analysts agree, those from RUSI and CSIS, that Putin is trading altitude for time. And at this point, he's really just running out of both. Russia can't replace time, it can't replace oil, and does not have the aviation capacity to continue doing this forever. But it's not only the Russian military aviation that is crashing, it's also their economy. So Rosstat, which is the official government statistics bureau, removed GDP, retail, and wholesale data for the June numbers that it released. Now, Putin has apparently directed that any downturn in the economy be hidden from the public, that is, to not be released. But by accident, they uploaded the internal documents that showed that GDP had shrunk by 1.5% month over month. This blackout is the first since the Soviet Union. It's amazing that the government is trying to hide even more data than they were before. Because when you see numbers vanishing, the collapse is already in motion. You don't have to hide or to lie about it because it will not make things better. It doesn't hide the fact that everybody sees the situation is worsening. But this is typical of the Kremlin. The Kremlin, when it's lost or it is losing, always tries to hide the truth. And that's perhaps why it's not a surprise that the minions of the Kremlin, the minions of Putin across the country, behave exactly the same way. We now see them cutting off the mobile internet whenever there's drone attacks. We see them trying to censor whatever the public says and to hide from the public what is really going on. But once again, people are stuck now for days in airports as Ukrainian drones fly overhead. It's very hard to act like there's nothing going on. But as usual, the Kremlin protocol won't change. When something is struck, attacked, just shut off the truth. But at this point, what that really means is that Russia isn't just losing, but it's quietly bleeding out invisibly. Now, keep in mind, oil is vital for the Russian economy. It's absolutely key. And it's in fact the single largest contributor to the national budget. And at present, India buys about 35% of all Russian oil, meaning India alone makes up about 11% of all of Russia's national budget. And you know what happened? July 30th, India quietly halted Russian oil imports. And that's specifically because they were scared of more tariffs coming from the United States. So Indian Oil Corps replaced its orders with 5 million barrels from the US and 2 million barrels from the United Arab Emirates. 4 state-owned Indian refineries followed suit, freezing Russian contracts. And this is where there's a lot of things that seem to be changing very quickly in Washington. Because it's not only this sort of outside pressure, these threats to go after India and put tariffs on their goods that have totally upset the Russian economy. It's also the American president's response to former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. In fact, what's played out in the last 12 hours has frankly shocked the Russians. They did never expect this. So Dmitry Medvedev referenced a Soviet era nuclear retaliation system in a cheeky Twitter post. Now, Trump, in response to that, announced he'd ordered 2 U.S. nuclear submarines into position. And what's incredible about that is how quiet the Kremlin became after that. At some point, they realized perhaps this is not such a good idea. This might get a little bit out of hand. And I think at this point, the people who write Medvedev's content realize perhaps they'd be more careful in their word choice. Because at this point, the Kremlin has to assume that the threat made by the White House was real. Defense readiness as a result has to surge. And there's a lot of actions they have to take in response, thinking that this could be an escalatory situation. And this is all because of a Twitter post. Now, we have to understand, as we've discussed before, Dmitry Medvedev does not actually write these tweets. He does speak English, and he does speak English well, but he does not write these tweets. It's definitely not him. He's just a puppet. And that's why he's actually the puppet that always makes threats. It's because then he's the crazy one. The threats make then Putin seem rational or less crazy. So Dmitry Medvedev says nationalist things, talks about invading Europe or nuclear wars or World War III or attacking NATO. He says these sorts of things because it then, in comparison, it makes Putin seem much more normal. But we've looked into this before, and Dmitry Medvedev not only certainly does not write those tweets, but it's been analyzed. It's been analyzed, his word choice, his grammar, his punctuation. And it's not the same form as his other written text. So we simply know from the fingerprint of the writing that Dmitry Medvedev is not the author of this. But whoever the author is, at this point, has created an international incident. But that's because Putin and his regime, they frankly just sometimes really misread the situation. And when they really misread it, it can really backfire badly. So why is that? What is it that drives Putin at the end of the day? Is it really just all a Napoleonic complex? Well, today's news showed Putin meeting with his Belarusian counterpart, Lukashenko. They said nothing new. Putin again said that Ukraine's government was illegitimate and offered peace talks, which just means that he would still accept a Ukrainian surrender. But there's something else that people notice. And it's been noticed before, but it's always fun to see. So Putin is 170 centimeters tall. That's 5'7". Lukashenko is 188 centimeters. That's 6'2". And dozens of verified videos at this point show him wearing what we think are 10 to 12 centimeter, that is 4 to 5 inches, platform shoes. And why is that? Because he is much shorter than most of the leaders he meets with. And that's why we see that Kremlin photographers are forced to use obscure angles. And just frankly, when you look at the photos, they always look quite untypical when there's photos with Xi or Erdogan or Vucic, because the Russian president is simply very short. And apparently that affects his ego. And in fact, that's what some analysts have said is a reason to believe that he could in fact escalate, is that he has a chip on his shoulder about his height. But that's for others to decide. What I think is more interesting, though, and the more important takeaway, is that Ukraine's asymmetric war is breaking the Russian system. Russia's oil is burning. We see that its bombers are overextended. Its economy is disappearing. Its dictator is out wearing lifts. And every piece is collapsing in sequence. Because this is not just battlefield erosion. It's the regime itself eroding. It's the fuel, the laws, every part of it is just coming apart. But how many more refineries must explode before Russia admits that it's losing? How long before the Kremlin's silence is louder than its own weapons? So bookmark this, think about it. The next refinery won't be the last, because there will be more to come. But at this point, the Putin regime has less time than it possibly realizes. The situation within Russia is getting clearly much worse. And as we've discussed before, for dictatorships, the reason you should worry about that is not necessarily for the people. Dictators don't care about their people. It's because somebody else within Russia, within their Kremlin, is also watching this and realizing right now, Vladimir Putin is very weak. Maybe right now is the right time to end the Putin regime. Thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel. And as always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.